Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. I hope you're all having an amazing day. By golly gosh, it's good to be back. As regular viewers will know, I was sick for a couple of days last week, and then yesterday, honestly, there wasn't a huge amount of news that was happening in the world of technology, so I decided to instead work on a couple of projects, and you can see a couple of reviews that I've also been kind of grinding away at, so there's certainly going to be a lot of content. Speaking of grinding away, Amy is currently in the painstaking process of editing the Neil Trevitt interview, and it's coming on fairly well. I think she's almost done, so that shall be up tomorrow. And if you do want to learn about what Neil, who of course is one of the vice presidents of NVIDIA plus works at Kronos Group, has to say about ray tracing technology, the next generation consoles, graphics technology at large, high core count processors from AMD, and a lot more, I would highly suggest you check out the interview. As I said, it's going to be uploaded tomorrow. It is fairly lengthy, but it's very, very interesting, and I'm going to be following up with a part 2 probably in the not too distant future. Anyway, I have gone that way into the video rather than that way. I've gone completely the wrong direction for an intro. But we have lots of news that I want to get into. The first of which concerns AMD and Big Navi, high-end Navi, Big Radeon, whatever you want to call it. As AMD have actually commented again concerning the potential for this card. So I'm going to step back a moment and talk about what AMD discussed heavily prior to the launch of Ryzen, the original Ryzen and Zen. The phrase that kept on cropping up was disruption in the marketplace, disrupting the CPUs, and there was some, well, skepticism. I'm just going to go with that word, skepticism. Could AMD do it? After all, they came from an architecture like Bulldozer, a pile driver, which wasn't exactly hitting on all cylinders. In fact, it was hitting on 4 of the 8. But sorry, I could not resist. Anyway, but of course they did. So Paul, why on earth are you talking about Ryzen? What's that got to do with anything and disrupting the marketplace? Well, what's really interesting is that one of the higher-ups at Team Radeon are stating that with 4K gaming, AMD are looking to disrupt the marketplace as well. This information comes from the Radeon management lead, Chandrasekar. Hopefully I pronounced his last name correctly. I'm going to go through all of his quote because I find it extremely interesting. With the Radeon 5000 series, we're essentially covering 90-something% of the total PC gamers today. And so that's the reason why no 4K right now, because the vast majority of them are at 1440p and 1080p. That doesn't mean a 4K capable GPU isn't incoming. It is coming. And for the here and now though, we want to focus on the vast majority of gamers. So, this is the quote that I found really interesting. Similar to Ryzen, he continues, all of us need a thriving Radeon GPU ecosystem, so we are going after 4K. And going to similarly disrupt 4K? Absolutely. You can count on that, but that's all I can say for now. End quote. So basically I reread that quote a couple of times, and there are several interesting statements he makes there. The first is when he says that the RX 5000 series will cover 90%-ish of gamers. This most likely means that the higher end cards are going to be RX 6000 series, and this tallies up perfectly with a rumour from myself actually, from one of my sources. They told me that almost certainly, they were almost positive that the RX 6000 series was going to be RDNA 2. That would be Navi 21 and Navi 23. Another one of my sources has told me that we will see a drastic increase in the number of compute units, and a couple of people I've been speaking to have also whispered that we could potentially see up to 80 compute units in Big Navi, and that it would feature a drastic increase in performance. Indeed, another person also told me that we would see a drastic increase in the efficiency of RDNA 2 as well. These are things I've covered in multiple videos in the past, which is one of the reasons I'm kind of glazing over it here. And this also brings us to the leaked OpenVR benchmark, which, as we know, puts it around 30-ish% faster than the RTX 2080 Ti in a benchmark which, honestly, heavily favours Nvidia. If you overclock the RTX 2080 Ti, then it's around a 20% advantage for big Navi. That, to me, is quite disruptive. And if you think about it very carefully, let's say that Nvidia, with the next generation cards, whether that's RTX 30 if you want to call it that, you can call it Ampere, you can call it Hopper, it doesn't really matter. I'm just going to call it Ampere for this video. But let's say with Ampere, they do manage to increase the performance by 50% for traditional rasterization performance. And I don't think that's out of the realms of possibility. They nudge up the number of CUDA cores, which is definitely possible if they're going to the 7nm process, which they are. They increase the clock frequency to, let's say, 2.5 gigahertz, 2.3, 2.4-ish, whatever. Depending on what they're doing in the rest of the architecture, of course, that's also in the realms of possibility. And they also make some minor tweaks to the architecture. This is not stuff that would be pertaining to ray tracing. Like, I do suspect ray tracing performance is going to be drastically better. But purely on traditional rasterization performance, 30, 40, 50% more for the equivalent tier of card. So, for example, the RTX 2080 is probably going to be about 50% slower than the RTX 3080. That's just a guess. It could be a little more. Nvidia could be shooting for a little bit more, but I think 50% increase generation to generation is pretty safe, given what they've achieved on average. There are certainly some generations where it's way overshot that. Like, if you look at the GTX 980 to the GTX 1080, it was just ridiculous. It was basically the equivalent of two 980 in SLI. I don't know, it's just kind of weird that SLI is dead now. Well, basically dead. Anyway, so I think 50% is definitely plausible. And if AMD can manage to continue to push the performance of whatever these cards are called, let's say the RX 6000 series, to be 30-40% faster than the RTX 2080 Ti, even if they don't beat the performance of Ampere, but they price the cards competitively, I think that's pretty good. However, the verbiage that is being used here is that they're trying to disrupt the market. And that, of course, also seems to pertain to what I was told, that Navi 21 and 23 are being called the Nvidia killer. Navi 23 is what I was told was called the Nvidia killer. However, there is some confusion from a couple of my sources what is actually the bigger card. And some people are saying that Navi 21 has 80 compute units, others are telling me it's Navi 23 which has compute units, and given that the next generation Xbox seems to be using Navi 21 Lite, and seems to have the mid-50s for its compute units, potentially Navi 21 has up to 64 and Navi 23 has up to 80, but a lot of that is just guesswork on my part based upon the fact that several sources are telling me different things, but ultimately that the RX 6000 series has up to 80 compute units. It's going to be fascinating to see, though, what AMD means in terms of technology. I'm very curious to see the ray tracing performance of these cards and how it compares to the RTX 20 series and also future generations from Nvidia. Neil was telling me, and you'll find out more in the interview if you watch it tomorrow, nudge, 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 that Nvidia are definitely heavily investing in the ray tracing ecosystem, and Nvidia definitely believe it's the future. He didn't provide any insight into the performance, of course, for Ampere, because, well, he wouldn't, so I don't want you watching that interview because of that, but he definitely said that ray tracing is something that Nvidia heavily believes in. So to me, it would make sense for them to continue to drastically increase the performance from generation to generation. Anyway, the next generation of cards, hopefully, is not too long into the future. And it's going to be very interesting to me, given what we're expecting the next generation of consoles to be capable of, how games actually evolve and how technology will change over the next couple of years in PC gaming. While we are on the subject of graphics, I'd also like to discuss a discovery of Rogame on Twitter. he's managed to find a couple of benchmarks of Intel's DG1. DG1, of course, is a prototype board made primarily to help developers understand the XT architecture from Intel. And it's not exactly designed to be a high-end card or anything like that, so this is not something that's going to run, let's say, the new Doom at like 4K at 2 billion frames a second. Instead, it's purely designed to enable developers to be like, oh, okay, this is what happens when we run code like this, and this causes things to crash. So it does have 96 execution units, and there is an entry which has the GPU running up to 1.5 GHz for its core clock. Furthermore, the memory bus appears to be 96-bit with 3 GB of memory total. Intel, in a separate piece of news, has also confirmed that Ponte Vecchio is going to launch by 2021. It's looking like it's going to be late 2021, which of course is going to be the 7nm GPUs, which are going to be aiming at multiple different markets, including but not limited to high-performance computing like data centers, as well as gaming and so on and so on. And given it's last alphabetically, we are now going to finally talk about the PlayStation 5. Yep, there are a couple of very interesting stories floating around for Sony's next generation console. There has been a lot of discussion in the industry that we will see some type of reveal from Sony, which will take place in February, although multiple people are stating it's going to happen early February, like the 5th is one popular date, the 29th is another popular date, and just about every other day of the calendar now has just been taken up by some industry insider who is like throwing a dart at the calendar like, that's when it's going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if Sony do provide some information in February, but I'm not saying that with insider information. But this news kind of pertains to that, but it comes from Currys PC World. If you're unfamiliar with Currys/PC World, they are a retail chain here in the United Kingdom which sells a whole bunch of electrical stuff. So this would be everything from toaster ovens to PCs to games consoles, TVs, and so on and so on. Back in the day, actually, funnily enough, before the two companies merged, I actually bought my PlayStation 2 from Currys. Yeah, those were the days. Spending way too much time playing Tekken Tag and other games at launch. Anyway, so what's really interesting is a Twitter video from the company seems to indicate that the PlayStation 5 is not too long into announcement before we can start to pre-order it. This is not officially from Sony, so it's interesting that we have Currys that have put this up early. It means one of three things. One, they've broken an NDA. Two, they're just guessing. Or three, they're super early to the party and they've somehow managed to have some type of exclusive pre-order, which would be interesting. I personally believe they may either be guessing or they've broken some type of NDA, although it's been up for a couple of hours at the time I'm recording this tweet, and it hasn't been quickly removed, although it hasn't gained a huge amount of traction yet, as once again the time I'm recording this, but a number of people have forwarded me this news story, and the final news story for today also concerns the PlayStation 5, but this time it concerns the SSD inside the console, as there is a rumour floating around that the SSD inside the PlayStation 5 will be faster than what we have with the next generation Xbox. Last November, there was an image which was shared from Samsung, and Nico partner analyst Daniel Ahmed actually shared this on Twitter, and this was pointing to a SSD made by Samsung which is going to be in the next generation of consoles. Allegedly, this is going to be a custom SSD which is going to be in next generation consoles, and is going to be super duper duper fast. As you would expect, there's not exact information regarding the performance, but supposedly this does tally up with what we're hearing about the PlayStation 5, that it's going to have a super fast SSD drive, and Sony's own words, it's actually claimed to be faster than what you can currently buy for PC. And given that PCs already have PCIe Generation 4, that would mean that the read and write speeds for this drive are going to be pretty damn snappy. Feist, an employee, has actually detailed some of the information of the SSD controller used in the next generation Xbox Scarlett. This was actually plonked on LinkedIn. Surprising how many leaks actually come from LinkedIn. But basically, you can see the information yourself, including the chips which are used inside the next generation Xbox. Now, what's really interesting is if you Google those chips, they are only capable of speeds of up to around Generation 3, despite the fact that they are PCIe 4 drives. Basically, this is just a case of the controller itself not being fast enough to maintain PCIe 4 SSD speeds. What's quite interesting as well is that Phison recently claimed that they are not working with Sony for their SSDs in a press statement, so working with Samsung seems to be most logical. Ultimately though, how much stock you can put in a LinkedIn post is kind of up to you. It's also entirely possible that this individual who put their post on LinkedIn actually was referring to the lower end Xbox of Project Scarlett and not the Xbox Series X. Now, if you think about it, the lower end console could certainly do with slower read speeds, you would expect. But ultimately, a lot of this is just speculation. With all of that said though, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. If you did, then please leave a like on the video because, well, it helps us out a ton, and also get subscribed to the channel for much more content. Take care of yourself and have an amazing day. Bye for now.